Hello. Now we're going to start answering some trickier questions about reading the graph of the function. Uh, they're a little bit more complicated than the ones we did in that first video. So first, let's say we have a graph of a function and we want to use the points on this graph to answer questions about the function g using function notation. I think this is one you might be able to try yourself if you're feeling comfortable. So you can pause it here and then fast forward to check, but I'm going to go through it here anyways. So the first one, part A, let's start with the g of -2. So remember, when you read it as g of -2, say it out loud with the of. It'll make everything easier to learn the language. The of part, the -2, is the input, and that always stands for the x coordinate. And the result, the whole thing, is the y coordinate. So we're going to look at where is -2 here. It's right here. And what is the y coordinate of that point? That looks like that y coordinate is 0 because it's on the x-axis. So that means this result is 0. And that's the answer to that question. Let's do the same thing with g of 5. So let's find out where x equals 5 is on the x-axis here. So that's x equals 5. And what is the y coordinate at that point? The y coordinate of a point always represents the f of that function value, the output. So that y coordinate there, which is 1, is f of 5. So that is this result. Or sorry, not f, excuse me. Whoops. G is what I meant to do there. So that means g of 5 is 1. Okay, so that's A. For part B, for what values of t is g of t equal to -2? And remember, maybe I shouldn't actually be calling this x here because it's really the t-axis in this case, but you can call it x if you want to. So anyways, for part B, we want to make g of t equal to -2. Now this is saying the output is -2, or in other words, y equals -2. So this is kind of like asking the question, what values of t make y equal to -2? So we're going to look at where y is -2 at all of these points here. So there's actually 3 different solutions to this equation. 3 different values of t that will work. There's the t is -5, t right here is -3, and t right here looks like 1, 2, 3. So those are all solutions of this. T equals -5. All right, so let's find the largest or maximum value of g of t. So that's going to be where the y coordinate, the vertical coordinate, represents g of t here. And we want to make that as large as possible. And it looks like that happens here at this point. The y coordinate there, or in other words, the g of t coordinate, the output coordinate, is 4. So the answer to C is 4 is the maximum value of g of t. And then the other question is, what value of t does this function take on, this maximum value? That's this value there is equal to 1. So that happens at t equals 1. So in other words, you could say that g of 1 is equal to 4 is another way to kind of answer that question. Okay, let's look at D. On what intervals is G increasing? So first of all, what do we mean by G is increasing? So here's a definition of an increasing function. It means as t increases, so does g of t. And a lot of the time, t represents time. It's really commonly used as a horizontal axis variable because it kind of makes sense because as time goes on, we read in the Western world from left to right. So saying that as time goes on, the function value gets bigger is another way to read that, as you go from left to right. So let's see where that happens. First, as you go from -5 to -4 here, the function is going downwards. So yeah, you're going from t equals -2 down to g of t equals -2 down to g of t equals -3. That's a decreasing g of t, so it's not happening there. But then let's look at what happens here. As you go from -4 up to t equals 1 here, let's look at what is happening. The function values there start increasing again. You go from f of t is -3 up to f of t equals 4, the maximum thing there. So that is one interval where g is increasing. And you can say at an interval or on an interval. So it's increasing on that interval from t equals -4 up to t equals 1. And then here, the function values start going down again as you go from left to right. So it's decreasing. It's a decreasing function there. But then here, from this point to this point, that's going from t equals 3 there up to t equals 5. It looks like the function values are increasing again. So we can actually say there's two intervals where it's increasing, like so. Here's one to do yourself. I want you to do your own answers for these. If you get it wrong, that's okay. Just cross it out. I'm going to show you the answers in a minute, and then write the right answers down for these. But read these carefully, try it yourself, and let's pause it here. Here are these answers. For the first one, if we say a graph is increasing, it should say the y values increase as x increases. So the x values just increase if you're looking at it from left to right, or maybe they're decreasing if you just read it from right to left. But the thing that makes it increasing is the fact that the y values increase along with x. B is true. We had an example of B with the last one. The highest point was the function value g of 1 equals 4. So that's the y coordinate there is 4. C is false because if we say that f is increasing on this interval, that means that means 2 and 7 are values of x, or like t, they're input values, and the function values actually would be increasing from f of 2 to f of 7. This one was a tricky one. If you got it wrong, you shouldn't feel bad because it's weirdly worded and it's definitely new language. So for C, it is not possible for a function of x to take on the same value. That means a function taking on the value means you're talking about y, or the output, at two different x values. So we had a counter example of this in the last one. With that graph of that function, we had 3 different values of t that give you the same function value of -2. Here's another one for you to do. I will show you the answers in a minute, but it's important that you try it yourself. And don't worry about getting it wrong. This is maybe the first time you've seen this stuff. And now's the time to pause it so you can read it and do it yourself. And here's those answers. G of 0 is 3, because if you plug in x equals 0, the y value as the result is 3. So 3 is the answer to that. What values of t makes g of t equal to 0? So that g of t is 0 means the y coordinate is 0. So that's talking about the t-intercepts. And that happens at g of negative 2 is 0 and g of 4 is 0. And the minimum value of g is negative 3, and that happens when t is negative 4. And also g is decreasing at these places where I highlighted. So the intervals there are between negative 5 and negative 4. That interval is right here. And then it's decreasing again when t is between 1 and 3. So that's that interval right there. And so yeah, it's tricky stuff. I do recommend talking to people about this, because this section really is about the language and making sure you're practicing using function notation. And just like learning any other language, the most important thing is to practice it. And the best way to practice it is to talk out loud about it. So hopefully you can work with a friend on this homework. We'll do an activity in class, and I'll see you in the next video.